There is a reason the fire of God has not fallen on you. You have asked for it. You have sung about it, prayed for it, watched others seem to have it, and wondered why it has passed you by. And you have concluded, perhaps, that it simply is not for you, that the fire falls on a chosen few and you are not among them. But that is not the reason. The fire has not fallen on you for one reason, and once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. The fire of God falls only on the desperate, and you have never been desperate. You have wanted the fire, but you have wanted it comfortably, casually, as one more good thing added to an already comfortable life. And the fire does not fall on the comfortable. It never has. In all the history of God's dealings with men, the fire has fallen only on those who were desperate for it, who sought it as a drowning man seeks air, who would not be denied, who came to the end of themselves and cried out for God with a violence that the comfortable have never felt. That is who the fire falls on, not the casual, not the curious, not the comfortably religious who would like a little more of God if it could be had without disturbing their ease. The fire falls on the desperate, and tonight I am going to show you why, and what it would take for you to become the kind of person the fire actually falls on. Because the fire is real, and it is available, and the only thing standing between you and the fire is a desperation you have never yet allowed yourself to feel. But before we go any deeper, I want to find out who is out there. Because I believe that scattered across this comfortable, lukewarm generation, there is a remnant. Men and women who are sick of the comfortable religion that has left them cold, who are ready to become desperate for the fire whatever it costs. And I want to see you. So right now, before you go 1 second further, comment where you are watching from, your city, your country. Type it in the comments below. Let the remnant make itself known, so that across this dying world we can see that there are still those desperate enough for the fire to fall. And now, a direct word from us, the ones who make these messages, because this is where it becomes practical. The fire falls on the desperate, and desperation drives a man to seek God daily, with everything in him, in the secret place. But here's the hard truth. Most believers who feel the longing for the fire never build the life of seeking that the fire requires, because they have no plan, no discipline, no structure for the secret place. They feel desperate for an evening, and within days they are back to the comfortable routine, and the fire never comes. That is the exact problem we built the War Room Manual to solve. It is not a book to read and forget. It is a 30-day plan that takes the desperation you feel and builds it into a daily discipline of seeking God, the very kind of seeking the fire falls upon. It will never replace your Bible. The Word is the foundation and the final authority, and always will be. But the manual is the structure that turns a moment of desperation into a life of seeking. If you are done being comfortable and cold, and ready to seek the fire the way the desperate seek it, the link is in the description and pinned to the top of the comments. And now, quiet your heart, and let the preacher show you the fire that falls only on the desperate.
I want to speak to you about the fire of God, and about the desperation that alone draws it down. For I am persuaded that the great reason the church of our day is so cold is that the church of our day is so comfortable, and the fire of God has never once in the history of the world fallen on the comfortable. Look where you will in the scriptures and in the records of every awakening God has ever sent, and you will find the same thing without a single exception. The fire fell on the desperate. It fell on those who had come to the end of themselves, who were emptied of all confidence in their own strength, who sought God not as a pleasant addition to a satisfied life, but as the one absolute necessity of a life that could not go on without Him. The fire falls on desperation and on nothing else, and the reason so few know the fire is that so few are desperate. Let me tell you what I mean by desperation, for the word is easily misunderstood. I do not mean a passing wish for more of God, the kind of mild desire that rises in a stirring meeting and fades by the next morning. I mean a holy desperation, a spiritual hunger and thirst so intense that it consumes a man, that will not let him rest, that drives him to seek God with a violence and a persistence that the comfortable cannot imagine. It is the desperation of a man who has seen his own emptiness and cannot bear it, who has tasted enough of God to know he must have more or die, who has come to the place where the things that once satisfied him satisfy him no longer, and nothing will do but God himself. This is the desperation the fire falls on, not a wish, but a holy violence, not a preference, but a consuming need, not a man who would like the fire, but a man who must have it or perish. And it is precisely this desperation that the comfortable church has never felt, for it has just enough of God to be satisfied, and the satisfied are never desperate, and the fire does not fall on the satisfied. Let me draw the line clearly between the desperate man and the merely interested one, for many mistake interest for desperation and wonder why the fire does not fall. The interested man would like the fire. The desperate man must have it. The interested man seeks it when convenient. The desperate man seeks it as the first and last business of his life. The interested man is disappointed when the fire does not come. The desperate man is undone by it and keeps seeking, for he cannot accept a life without it. The interested man fits his seeking around his comforts. The desperate man sacrifices his comforts to his seeking. The interested man prays about the fire. The desperate man wrestles for it, weeps for it, tarries for it, refuses to be comforted without it. You may test yourself by this line. Which are you, interested or desperate? For the fire falls on one and passes by the other, and the whole difference between the cold professor and the burning saint is the difference between a man who was interested in the fire and a man who was desperate for it. Examine your own heart honestly. If you find only interest there, do not be content with it, for interest will never draw the fire. Cry out to God to deepen your interest into desperation, to take your faint wish and make it a consuming need, for only when the interest has become desperation will the fire begin to fall. And understand that desperation, once it truly takes hold, reorders a man's whole life, for it cannot remain a private feeling that changes nothing. The man who has become truly desperate for the fire finds his priorities rearranged, his schedule reshaped, his comforts surrendered, his time redirected, all of it bending now toward the one thing he must have. You can always tell the desperate man, for his desperation shows in what he does, not merely in what he feels. He rises early to seek God, or stays late, or both. He forsakes the entertainments that once filled his hours, not by grim duty, but because the hunger has made them taste like ashes. He guards his secret place as the most important appointment of his day. His whole life begins to organize itself around his seeking, because that is what desperation does. It makes the one thing needful actually the one thing, and pushes everything else to the margins. The comfortable man's life is organized around his comfort. The desperate man's life is organized around his seeking. And you may know which you are by looking honestly at what your life is actually organized around. When the fire becomes the thing your life bends toward, you have become desperate and the fire is near. Consider the upper room where the fire of Pentecost fell, for it shows you the pattern perfectly. Those who received the fire were not casual men who wandered in expecting nothing. They were a company who had been driven to desperation by the absence of their Lord, who tarried 10 days in prayer, who waited and sought and would not leave until the promise came. They were desperate men, and the fire fell on their desperation. And consider how the comfortable believer of our day would have fared in that upper room. He would have come for an hour, found the fire had not yet fallen, and gone home unconcerned, content to do without it. But the men of the upper room could not do without it. They were desperate, and so they tarried, and so the fire fell. The fire has always required the tarrying, and the tarrying has always required the desperation, for only the desperate will tarry, and the comfortable always leave before the fire comes. We want a Pentecost without the desperation that preceded it, and there is no such thing, for the fire falls on the desperate who tarry, and never on the comfortable who will not. Consider Elijah on Mount Carmel, for there the fire fell in a way that teaches us everything. He stood alone against the prophets of Baal, alone against a nation that had forgotten God, and he was desperate. Desperate for God to vindicate his name, desperate for the fire to fall and prove that the Lord was God. He repaired the broken altar, he laid the sacrifice in order, he drenched it with water until no natural fire could have touched it, and then he cried out to God with the desperation of a man whose whole life hung on the answer. And the fire fell and consumed the sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the water, and licked up the very dust. But mark the prophets of Baal, who wanted fire just as desperately, who cried out from morning to noon, who cut themselves and raved and gave everything they had, and no fire came. Why did fire fall on the one and not the others? Not because Baal's prophets lacked desperation, they were frantic with it. The fire fell on Elijah because his desperation was a holy desperation, directed to the true God, on a true altar, in the appointed way. There is a desperation that draws the fire, and a frenzy that does not, and the difference is not the intensity of the feeling, but the truth of the God it seeks, and the altar it is offered upon. So do not merely work yourself into a frenzy. Become desperate for the true God on the altar of a surrendered life, seeking him in the way he has appointed. And the fire will fall as it fell on Carmel, while the mere frenzy of the flesh, however intense, calls down nothing. And consider that Elijah, after the fire fell, prayed 7 times for the rain, sending his servant to look again and again, refusing to quit when the sky was clear, persisting until the small cloud appeared. This too is the desperation the fire requires. A persistence that will not quit, that prays and looks and prays again, that refuses to stop at the first disappointment or the 6th, but keeps on until the answer comes. The comfortable pray once and quit. The desperate pray 7 times and send the servant back an 8th, for they must have the answer and will not be denied. And this persistence is itself the mark of the desperation that draws the fire. The man who quits when the fire does not fall at once was never desperate, he merely wished. The man who keeps seeking through silence and delay, who will not be turned away, who persists as Elijah persisted, that man is desperate, and the fire falls on his persistence as surely as it fell on Carmel. I want you to see why God has ordained it this way, for it is not arbitrary. God gives the fire to the desperate because only the desperate are prepared to receive it rightly. The fire of God is not a toy, not a thrill, not a religious experience to be collected and displayed. It is the holy presence and power of God, and it can only be entrusted to those who have been emptied enough to hold it without being destroyed by it or turning it to their own glory. Desperation is the emptying. The desperate man has come to the end of his self-sufficiency, his pride, his confidence in his own strength. He has been hollowed out by his need, and the hollowing has made him a vessel the fire can safely fill. The comfortable man is full of himself, full of his own sufficiency, and there is no room in him for the fire. Were the fire to fall on his unbroken self-confidence, it would only feed his pride. So God, in his wisdom, withholds the fire from the comfortable, not from unwillingness, but because they are not yet prepared to receive it, and he gives it to the desperate, because their desperation has emptied them and made them ready. The desperation is not a price God demands arbitrarily. It is the very preparation that makes a man able to receive the fire at all. I must tell you something about this fire that explains why the desperate receive it and the comfortable shrink from it, even as they claim to want it. The fire of God is not only warmth and power, It is a consuming fire, and what it consumes is everything in a man that is not holy. Our God is a consuming fire, the scripture says, and when his fire falls in earnest, it does not merely comfort and empower. It burns, it purifies, it consumes the dross, it lays its hot hand on the sin and the self and the idols and reduces them to ash. And here, I am persuaded, is a hidden reason the comfortable do not truly want the fire. In their hearts they know that the real fire would consume things they are not willing to give up. They want the warmth without the burning, the power without the purifying, the glow without the consuming of their cherished sins. But you cannot have the one without the other. The same fire that warms also burns, and the desperate man wants it anyway. That is what makes him desperate. He has come to hate his sin and his coldness and his emptiness so much that he welcomes the fire that will consume them, crying, "Burn whatever must be burned, only let the fire fall." The comfortable hold back because they sense the fire would cost them their idols. The desperate run toward it because they want God more than the idols the fire would consume. Settle this, and you have found the root of your desperation or the reason for its absence. Are you willing to be consumed, or do you only want a fire that will leave your comfortable sins untouched? This is why the desperate are so few, for desperation requires that a man come to want God more than he wants his sin, more than he wants his comfort, more than he wants the approval of the world and the ease of the broad road. The desperate man has been brought to a place where these things have lost their hold, where he sees them for the chains they are, where he would gladly let the fire consume them all to gain the one thing he has come to want above everything. And the comfortable man has not come to that place. He still loves his comforts and his sins too well to want them consumed, and so he cannot be desperate. For desperation is precisely the state of a soul that wants God more than it wants anything the fire would take. Ask God to bring you to that place. Ask Him to make you want Him more than you want the things that have kept you comfortable and cold. For when you want God more than you want what the fire would consume, you will have become desperate, and the fire will fall. Now I must press the question upon you, for it is the question this whole message exists to ask. Why are you not desperate? You who have longed for the fire and never received it, why has the desperation never come? And I will tell you the reason, though it will sting. You are too comfortable. You have arranged a life that insulates you from the desperation, that keeps you just satisfied enough never to feel the consuming need. You have your comforts, your entertainments, your lesser loves, your thousand small satisfactions, and they keep the desperation at bay, feeding your soul just enough to prevent the holy hunger that would drive you to seek God with violence. Your comfort is the enemy of your fire. The very things that make your life pleasant are the things that keep you from the desperation the fire requires. And if you would have the fire, you must be willing to let go of the comforts that have been keeping you satisfied, to allow yourself to feel the emptiness you have been medicating, to become desperate by stripping away the substitutes that have stood between you and the holy hunger. The comfortable will never be desperate, and the satisfied will never burn. And as long as you cling to the comforts that satisfy you, the fire will pass you by. And I must tell you that this satisfaction is itself a kind of judgment, for God often gives a man exactly as much of himself as the man truly desires. The man who wants only enough religion to ease his conscience receives only enough to ease his conscience, and no more. The man who is desperate for God himself receives God himself, the fire and the fullness. We have, each of us, very nearly as much of God as we actually want. Not as much as we say we want, for we all say we want more, but as much as we truly want, as proven by what we are willing to seek and sacrifice and suffer for. And this is why the comfortable remain comfortable. They have as much of God as they desire, which is to say, enough to be respectable and not enough to burn, and their very satisfaction is the evidence and the judgment of their shallow desire. If you would know how much you truly want the fire, do not ask your words, ask your life. Ask how desperately you have sought it, what you have been willing to forsake for it, whether you have tarried for it as the upper room tarried, or quit at the first silence. The measure of your seeking is the measure of your desire, and the measure of your desire is the measure of what you will receive. The comfortable receive little because they desire little. The desperate receive much because they desire much. And God, in perfect justice, gives to each according to the true desperation of his heart. And do not wait for some better season to become desperate, for the comfortable season never improves of itself, it only deepens its hold. Every day you remain comfortable, the comfort grips you tighter, the hunger dulls further, the capacity for desperation withers, until at last you cannot even feel the longing for the fire that once stirred you. The time to become desperate is now, tonight. While the longing is awake and the truth is burning in you, while you can still feel the ache that the long comfortable eventually lose altogether. Do not say you will seek the fire desperately when life is less busy or the moment is more convenient, for that moment is the comfortable soul's perpetual excuse, and it never arrives. Become desperate now. Stir up the hunger now. Forsake the comforts now, while you still can feel how cold you are, for the longer you wait, the colder you grow, and the colder you grow, the harder it becomes to feel the desperation that alone draws down the fire. Let me tell you how a man becomes desperate, for it is the most important thing I can show you. Sometimes God himself makes a man desperate, stripping away his comforts and his confidences until he has nothing left but his need. And blessed is the man whom God so reduces, though it feels like ruin at the time, for it is the very making of him. But you need not wait for God to strip you. You may make yourself desperate by a deliberate turning away from the comforts and substitutes that have satisfied you, by allowing yourself to feel the emptiness you have been hiding from, by setting your heart to seek God with a violence you have never permitted yourself. You become desperate by deciding that you will no longer be satisfied with anything less than God himself, by refusing the substitutes, by stirring up the holy hunger until it consumes you. Desperation can be cultivated. A man can fan the small spark of desire into a consuming flame of holy hunger by feeding it, by seeking, by refusing to be comforted by anything less than God, until the wish becomes a need and the preference becomes a desperation. And he is, at last, the kind of man the fire falls on. Do not wait passively for desperation to overtake you. Cultivate it. Stir up the hunger. Refuse the comforts. Seek God until you cannot live without him, and you will have become the desperate man the fire falls upon. And I would have you see that even the desperation itself is a gift of grace, that you may not despair if you feel no desperation, but ask God for it. For the very hunger that drives a man to seek God is awakened by God. The very desperation that draws the fire is itself the first work of the fire, beginning at a distance. So if you find your heart cold, your hunger faint, your desperation absent, do not conclude that the fire is not for you. Conclude rather that you must begin further back by asking God for the hunger itself, by crying out, not yet from desperation, but for desperation, Lord, make me desperate. Give me the holy hunger I do not have. Awaken in me the consuming thirst for you that I cannot work up by my own effort. And God answers that prayer, for it is according to his will, and he delights to give the hunger that he may then satisfy it. Many a soul that began cold and undesirous has prayed in this way, asking God for the very desperation it lacked, and has found the hunger awakened, the desperation kindled, and then the fire falling on the desperation God himself had given. So do not be turned back by your present coldness. Make your very coldness a reason to cry out, asking God to make you desperate, and trust him to awaken in you the hunger that he alone can give and then alone can fill. For from first to last the fire is the work of God, the desperation he awakens, the seeking he inspires, the fire he sends, the flame he sustains. Your part is to say yes, to refuse the comfort, to cry out for the hunger, and then to seek with the hunger he gives, to tarry and persist and not be turned away. But the whole of it, from the first stirring of desire to the final falling of the fire, is grace, and you need not fear that the demand is too great for you. For the God who calls you to desperation supplies the very desperation he calls for. So bring him your cold and comfortable heart, and ask him to make it desperate, and then seek him with the desperation he awakens. And the fire that falls only on the desperate will fall on the desperation he himself has worked in you. I must confront the comfortable religion of our day directly, for it is the great thief of the fire. We have built a Christianity designed for comfort, that asks nothing, costs nothing, disturbs nothing, that fits conveniently into an easy life and never drives anyone to desperation. And we wonder why we have no fire, but the comfort and the fire cannot coexist. The fire falls on the desperate, and our comfortable religion is engineered precisely to prevent desperation, to keep everyone satisfied, soothed, undisturbed. It is a religion of the lukewarm, and the Lord said of the lukewarm that he would spew them out of his mouth. For there is nothing so nauseating to God as a soul that has enough of him to be comfortable and not enough to burn. If we would have the fire, we must be willing to forsake the comfortable religion that has kept us from it, to let God disturb our ease, to become the desperate, hungry, violent seekers that the fire falls upon. The comfortable religion will never produce the fire. It was designed, whether we knew it or not, to prevent the very desperation the fire requires. Let me tell you what one desperate man on fire can do, for it shows you what hangs on this desperation. The history of every awakening God has ever sent traces back to a handful of desperate souls who would not be comforted until the fire fell. Revival has never begun with the comfortable many. It has begun always with the desperate few who sought God with a violence the rest could not understand, who tarried and wept and travailed until the fire came down and then carried it out into a cold and dying world. One man truly ablaze with the fire of God does more than 1,000 comfortable professors, for the fire is contagious, and the world that is unmoved by our arguments and untouched by our programs cannot ignore a man who burns. The dying world around you is not waiting for more comfortable Christians. It has more than enough of those. It is waiting, though it does not know it, for the desperate few who will pay the price of the fire and carry its blaze into the darkness. And you could be one of them. The desperation you are being called to is not for your own sake only. It is for the sake of every cold soul your fire might warm, every dark place your blaze might light. The comfortable cannot set anyone aflame, for they have no fire to give, but the desperate who receive the fire become the kindling of revival, the points of light from which the blaze spreads to a world in darkness. And once the fire has fallen, it must be tended, or it will go out. For this is a truth that many who once burned have learned to their sorrow. The desperation that brought the fire must continue in some measure to keep it, for the fire that is not fed dies down, and the soul that received the blaze in a season of desperation and then drifted back to comfort finds, to its grief, that the fire has gone cold. The altar fire in the temple was fed with fresh wood every morning, that it might never go out, and the fire of God in a human soul must likewise be tended daily, fed in the secret place, guarded from the comforts and distractions that would smother it. Do not imagine that the fire once received will burn on by itself while you return to your ease. The same seeking that drew it down must continue to sustain it, the same hunger fed daily, the same desperate dependence maintained, or the fire that fell in a glorious moment will slowly die in a comfortable season. The men who burned brightly across a whole lifetime were the men who stayed desperate across a whole lifetime, who never let the comfort creep back in to smother the flame, who tended the fire daily until the day they died still burning. But hear me now, for I would not leave you crushed under the demand for desperation without showing you the glory on the other side. The fire that falls on the desperate is worth every ounce of the desperation it requires. When the fire falls, it transforms everything. The coldness gives way to a holy warmth, the powerlessness to a power not your own, the deadness to a life that burns. The desperate man who sought God with violence and received the fire becomes a different creature altogether, ablaze with the presence of God, useful in his hands, alive with a life the comfortable never know. And he never regrets the desperation that brought him there. Ask any soul who was ever driven to desperation and received the fire whether the desperation was worth it, and you will hear the same answer every time. 1,000 times yes, for the desperation was the doorway to the fire, and the fire is worth everything. The comfortable have their ease, and they do not have the fire. The desperate paid the price of their comfort and received the fire, and there is no comparison between the two. Better to be desperate and burning than comfortable and cold. Better to be emptied and filled with fire than full of self and cold as the grave. So I bring you to the great question, and only you can answer it. Will you become desperate? Will you let go of the comforts that have kept you satisfied and cold, and allow yourself to feel the holy hunger and seek God with the violence that draws down the fire? Because the fire is available to you this very night, on the same terms it has always been available, not to the comfortable, not to the casual, not to the satisfied, but to the desperate. The fire falls on the desperate, and the only reason it has not fallen on you is that you have never been desperate. But you can become desperate this very night by forsaking the comforts and stirring up the hunger and setting your heart to seek God until you cannot live without Him. And when you have become the desperate man the fire falls on, the fire will fall, for it always has, on every soul that ever became desperate enough to receive it. Do not let this be one more message that stirs you and changes nothing, for that is the very comfort I have been warning you against. To be stirred by a message about the fire, to feel a momentary desire for it, and then to return to your comfortable life unchanged, is to do exactly what the comfortable always do, and it will leave you exactly as cold as it found you. The momentary stirring is not the desperation, it is the counterfeit of it, the comfortable soul's substitute for the real thing, a feeling that costs nothing and changes nothing. Do not be content with it. Let the stirring you feel right now become a true and lasting desperation that drives you not to another comfortable feeling, but to the secret place this very night, to seek God with a violence you have never permitted yourself until the fire falls. So go and become desperate. Forsake the comforts that have kept you satisfied and cold, and allow yourself at last to feel the holy hunger you have been medicating all your life. Go into the secret place and seek God there with a violence and a persistence you have never known, refusing to be comforted by anything less than Himself, tarrying as the upper room tarried until the fire falls. And do not seek Him desperately for one night only, but build the desperate seeking into the daily discipline of your life, fanning the hunger into a consuming flame that drives you to God morning after morning, for the fire falls on those who seek it desperately and keep seeking until it comes. You have been comfortable long enough and cold long enough, and the fire has passed you by long enough. Become desperate. Seek the fire as the desperate seek it, and the fire that falls only on the desperate will fall, at last, on you. In Jesus' name, become desperate for God, and do not rest until the fire falls.